Mark Patterson, though, now joins us from New Zealand First, who's landed somewhere. Where are you, Mark?
Wellington, Michael, good morning. Yes, I'm in that most first world of all problems, transit hell with kids, but getting there.
Yeah, you're in Wellington. Oh, you're flying Air New Zealand or Jetstar?
Air New Zealand.
Oh, commiserations. Watch out for the counter staff there. They're all a bit funny.
Yeah.
Yes, it's all right. Everywhere else, they're great in Queenstown, but for some strange reason, Wellington ends up with all the misanthropes in the world working for Air New Zealand. Anyhow, one to a side. Mark, thank you for joining us. Over the weekend, you and your party leader, your party and your party leader, are the subject of quite strong attack from the Prime Minister as to characterising you as a coalition of chaos. What was your response initially upon hearing that?
Well, I guess our first response was that we were surprised that the Prime Minister hasn't been listening or reading to Winston's speeches over the last 18 months, because we'd certainly well and truly ruled out working with them. So it was the mother of all non-announcements from him. But in terms of that wider accusation, look, we're a party that's been around 30 years. We've always put the good of the country first, and with whatever governing arrangement we might end up in after the October the 14th would be no different.
Yes, well, the Prime Minister has had a go at you because he thinks he can tar the National Party with the unpopularity of New Zealand First. Do you see that as an issue? Do you think that the majority of New Zealanders dislike or don't trust New Zealand First?
Well, I'm just travelling back from New Plymouth, actually, where I attended the public meeting that Winston had yesterday up there, 400 people, standing room only, and at the end of it, a standing ovation. So whilst Chris Hipkins might be talking to a segment of the population, I can tell you there's another big segment of the population out there that's pretty angry, and a lot of the stuff that Winston's been talking about in his meetings are really resonating.
Now, Winston, listen, I have said both last week and this week that he'd be rubbing his hands at being the subject of an attack from the Prime Minister and being the centre of TV1 News and TV3 News last night. Do you think, just quietly between you and me, this is going to be a tactic that will backfire? Oh,
absolutely. And, it does. I mean, National would be absolutely stupid to rule us out in terms of it. It would potentially limit their options to pushing us onto the cross benches, where we could actually have even more leverage over them than in a coalition agreement. And I think actually there's just an undercurrent out there, and I've been around for a while now, and I've never seen it quite like this, that it doesn't actually matter what the politicians are going to tell us, because people are going to vote the way they're going to vote. It's their day, October the 14th, and they're pretty mad about some stuff. And they're not hearing from the main parties those issues being represented in the way that they would like them to be, and they're certainly hearing it from Winston and New Zealand First. So I don't think it actually matters what any of those major parties say. We've got momentum in our own right for people that are going to vote on some issues that are pretty fundamental to them.
New Zealand First, ironically, an act whose party leaders hate each other personally, as we both know, so I'm not even going to ask you to comment on that. It's pretty obvious. But the thing is that you're both sort of, in a funny sort of way, saying the same thing on certain issues. Co-governance would be one of them, would be most obvious. Law and order would be another one. State of education probably would be another one. And on transgender, and the sort of, I don't know, the Wellington LGBT alphabet type domination, media manipulation, all those sorts of things. You're both hitting the same market, aren't you? What's the difference between you and ACT on those issues, or can two people be right at the same time?
Oh, well, I think we would claim that our track record on the issues that you've outlined is far stronger than theirs. And we are an inherently conservative party, where they're essentially a liberal party. So I think it's much more in our DNA than theirs to be taking some of those positions, and of course it directly contradicts some of the stuff that they've been doing in terms of co-governance. Rodney Hyde was the person that brought that into the Auckland Super City arrangement. So, we'll put their record up against ours any day. But also, on economic issues, we differ quite markedly. I mean, they're looking extraordinarily at raising taxes on the lowest income New Zealanders whilst cutting taxes for the highest income New Zealanders, which is just an anathema to us. So there's plenty of difference there, but there is some similarities which suggest that we will find some common ground if we're in that position.
Nevertheless, when Winston was last in charge between 2017 and 2020, that was when Hei Purpur was commissioned. He signed it off in Cabinet, Mark. I would have thought that document of its own hardly gave him clean hands.
That's not true at all. It was, as I understand it, the situation was that it was required to be commissioned because that was the undertaking that key and a party and a government that ACT was supporting. But we never saw the final outcome, and Willie Jackson has confirmed that. In fact, he said that the reason specifically that Purpur wasn't revealed to Winston and New Zealand First is that we would have campaigned on it and got back into Parliament almost certainly off the back of angst around that particular report.
No, I know that, but it was commissioned when Winston was the deputy. I mean, you didn't need to commission it at the end of the day. I mean, the very people that he appointed to that person would have come up. It's an inevitable report given the authors who were appointed to do it.
Well, I wasn't sitting in Cabinet.
No, you weren't.
When those things happened, so I don't know the minutiae of that, but I know we never saw the outcome, which we would have definitely shot down, and Willie Jackson's confirmed that. So we did our statutory obligation, I presume, but beyond that, we had no obligation to follow its recommendations and wouldn't have.
Okay. All right. Now, you've got one problem. You always have this problem every election, and it's when the list from New Zealand First comes out. Everybody else has released theirs. When's yours coming out?
Yours comes out on writ day, as I understand it. Hopefully I'm not revealing any state secrets, but we tend to leave it to the last possible moment. So I believe that's the case this year as well. What's
writ day? Is that, 28 days before the election or something?
It's the day when you essentially have to confirm who your candidates are, so and provide your list. So it's always been our strategy, for whatever reason, to do that on the final day.
I can tell you what the strategy is based on, and as you probably are aware, and that is that you have some people who, when they find out where they are on the list, tend not to work very hard.
Yeah, there's probably some strategy around that. I mean, we've got a team of candidates that are working extraordinarily hard, I can assure you of that. It's I've never seen anything quite like it from the New Zealand First team collectively. But, so there may be a few tactics around that. And the other thing it does, it allows some campaign time to identify, anyone that may be campaigning on their own issues or veering off the party line. And I think so there's some prudence and just delaying that, seeing how everyone goes and, getting a full view of the candidates available for the list is finalised.
Now, just for you and for our listeners, writ day is Sunday the 10th of September. So that's, it's about 2 weeks away, isn't it? 2 weeks.
Not long.
Yeah, no, it's a week on. It's a week on Sunday. Yeah. All right. And nominations close on Friday the 15th of September. Now, that's the next thing. One of the weaknesses I noticed also historically with New Zealand First has been you don't have candidates in every seat. And as you'll be aware, having a candidate in every seat's important because they do all the work in that seat, but they've also the person to go to the local meetings and things like that. Are you going to have candidates in every seat this time?
I don't believe so, almost certainly not. That's sort of party issue, but I know we've got about 35 candidates that have been identified to date. And you're right, it is a bit of an issue if you haven't got candidate in every seat. I know I'm covering about 3 electorates down south, and it does put an extra workload, but we have to be pretty careful. But I know there's been an unprecedented number of people come forward to be candidates, and you have to be pretty careful who you put up, and so they've been vetting those, and so it's not about just having any old person to put a rosette on. It's about having credible people that will represent the party position well.
No, I mean, you're right, and you're right. It's sometimes better to err on the side of caution than have some crazy, and then the media concentrate on that people for 3 days, and you've got had your your message obliterated. ACT found that last week, and also National the year before, National had all sorts of problems with its candidates last election in terms of their quality. But I guess the other question I'd have of you is that, Mark, New Zealand First has picked up a lot of that anti-mandate sentiment. Now, I know that there are anti-mandate, what you might call anti-vax, anti-mandate parties out there, Freedom New Zealand, Democracy New Zealand and things like that. But New Zealand First is the only realistic vehicle that they've got to get into Parliament. Have you found that a number of people who were upset to do with the COVID response have joined New Zealand First?
Well, there's certainly a large group of people that are upset about the COVID response, but coming along to our public meetings. It's noticeable by the Q&A at the end of it, and with some justification. There was some pretty draconian stuff that went on, and they're wanting some answers, and they're wanting a champion to take their causes forward. So in terms of the mandates, as opposed to the kind of straight anti-vax stuff, I think Winston's made it pretty clear he's triple vaxxed himself. So am I. That's not our fight, but our fight's the mandates and all the stuff that went on around that does need a good investigation.
Yes, yes it does. And finally, you are obviously, the really interesting thing, just to explain to our listeners, is that are you still living with the family in Lawrence?
Yeah, we're still in Lawrence.
So the kids are going to school in Dunedin, or are they going to school locally?
They go to Otago Girls now, so we do have a town base there.
Town base, yeah. That's a good school, Otago Girls.
Jude works there, so we're a wee bit split between the two, but it splits nicely across the Tyree electorate, so it's quite convenient in terms of electoral stuff at the moment. But,
so Mark, what electorate are you standing in at this coming election?
Tyree.
So that's one of our regular correspondents. It's Ingrid Leary's seat.
That's Ingrid's seat. One of your regular.
Yeah, well, actually, she's just sent me a text saying when can I next get on, which is fair enough. But the reason I'm interested in that is that, but of course you won't be expecting to win Tyree. You are obviously, though, if you've been up to New Plymouth, very much in the inner sanctum or the inner circle of Winston Peters and New Zealand First. Are you so from now on, Mark? You won't just be campaigning in Tyree. Where are you going? I mean, obviously, seeing you as one of their fundamental spokespeople.
Yeah, look, I do the agricultural stuff predominantly, and that was part of the reason for coming up to, the reason for going up to New Plymouth is that we were finalising some of the details around that. I'll be campaigning in Tyree, but ultimately it's a safe red seat, so there'll be, there'll be the biggest election shock of all time if I was to personally win it, and we're campaigning for the party vote there. As we are in most electorates around the country.
Is Winston standing in a seat?
No.
Okay, so he'll just be on the list.
I'm aware, but certainly hasn't declared that yet, and I doubt that he will be.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess that makes sense as well. And finally, this morning I had the chief executive. You'll be interested in this, Mark, of Waitomo Petrol on. Rural based, in actual fact. They originally come out of literally Waitomo, Tikawiti. They retail petrol. They're the cheapest petrol retailers in New Zealand by quite a bit. He made a point to me, during the discussion, that he expects the price of petrol to rise between 15 to 20 cents a litre prior to Christmas as a result of the changes to the emissions trading scheme. In other words, the government setting that minimum price at the auction And I think we've got at least one auction before Christmas. We might have two, but he says it'll be instant and it'll be immediate response to that. That's going to cause serious problems, isn't it, throughout New Zealand?
Yeah, and that's on top of already $3 a litre as you're driving around. So that's material, and on top of interest rates and the like. And it's also symptomatic of the wider debate. Actually, we had at New Plymouth yesterday. We were talking about energy security, the need to have a Ministry of Energy, and to actually look at how can we be starting to look at processing our own, or have the capacity to process our own oil reserves should we be faced with some sort of supply chain crisis, because we've only got about 3 days capacity for about 3 days supply there. So it's actually a serious issue that needs, more broadly, that energy space that needs a dedicated ministry, and it needs some serious investment to make sure that we're not so vulnerable.
All right. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. I wish you well. Look forward to seeing where you are on the list on September the 10th, but we'll certainly talk to you well before the election.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, mate. Look after yourself. Ta. That is Mark Patterson. He is, he very much is in the sanctum. I think he'll be in the top 5. He is New Zealand first leading South Island candidate, so he's also the agriculture spokesman. New Zealand First have always traditionally done quite well in the provinces and in the rural areas, believe it or not.